Student Sri Kumar is an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. He is a gold medalist for MA Philosophy from the Mahatma Gandhi University, Kottayam. He did his MPhil and PhD in philosophy from the Central University of Hyderabad and specializes in the areas of philosophy of language, continental philosophy, and hermeneutics. He has been into the academic profession since 1995 and has taught in Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit, Kaladi, Kerala and BITS Pilani, Rajasthan before joining the IIT Madras in 2003. Dr. Sri Kumar has published articles in various journals and has presented papers in national and international seminars. Some of the courses he offers include European Philosophy, Contemporary German Philosophy, Introduction to Indian Philosophy, Philosophical Hermeneutics, Philosophy and Critical Theory, and Philosophy of Language.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series in philosophy on Phenomenology and Existentialism, part 11. Before we start this episode, let me introduce the students. Mr. Badrinath.
Hello, sir.
And Mr. Lenin.
Hello.
In today's episode, we are going to cover the following topics: Husserl and empiricism. It's from here we will be actually starting from where we have stopped in the last episode. We had briefly seen how Husserl has appropriated the empiricist foundational principles on experience, human experience and all that. Now, beyond empiricism, here we could see that Husserl's project, phenomenological project, has really taken us beyond empiricism, and where he develops a concept of phenomenological experience which is different from the kind of experience with which the empiricist tradition is dealing with. The phenomenological experience and empiricist theory, we will be seeing this in a little detail at this particular point. And intentionality principle. This principle of intentionality, is one of the very important concepts which we are going to discuss in phenomenology, and which played a very major role, very vital role in Husserl's philosophy. This concept as such was not developed by Husserl, but he has adopted this notion from Brentano, his teacher, and he was a teacher of not just of Husserl but many others, including Freud. So these are the issues which we are going to discuss today, and let us start with Husserl and empiricism. Perspectivism retained. So this is something which in the last episode I have mentioned, that we experience things always from a perspective, and this is very fundamental to empiricist. It's a fundamental empiricist assumption that objects are given us from a perspective, or we experience them from a perspective. So this perspectivism is something which Husserl also admits and retains in his scheme of things. Now, objects is not actually given because it is perspectival. We will not get the object as it is. It is not wholly and entirely as that which is itself is, but always from somewhere, some perspective. And here we have to go really beyond empiricism, beyond this perspectivism also, because though Husserl retains perspectivism, at the same time he would like to emphasize that experience will transcend this perspective, so that there is an objective domain where we can really talk about experience. What is that? To understand what is that, we have to really go beyond empiricism, and this is where it starts. The experience of an object is not the same as a mere experience of the perspectival image of it. See, this is a very central issue as far as Husserl's criticism of empiricism is concerned. Husserl particularly attacks the image theory developed by empiricists. He is not against the perspectivism, but the image theory that utilizes perspectivism in a particular manner. Empiricism says that presentation of a visible side of an object. So as far as the image theory of empiricism is concerned, perspectivism means the object is presented, or presentation of a visible side of an object. But when it comes to Husserl, before that, but when we talk about genuine perception, presentation of the object from a side, it's not presentation of a visible side of an object, but it is presentation of the object from a side. When we say that genuine perception involves presentation of an object from a side, it implies that the object as such is given, it is there. Only thing is, we see the object or we perceive the object from a perspective. That doesn't make that our perception or our experience is confined or is exhausted with the perspectivism that is part of our perception. Rather, we perceive a full-fledged object from a side. We are going to see the details of it later. Here, when we see a tree, we do not see the tree image. For empiricist, this image, concept of image, is so central. But Husserl says that when we see a tree, we do not see the tree image or packet of sense data, but the tree itself, the concept of sense data, which is again so fundamental to the understanding of reality, understanding of knowledge acquisition as far as the empirists are concerned. They talk about sense data, which is a primary source of all experience and knowledge. We have seen this concept of sense data in the last episode, which are unexplainable starting points of all knowledge and experience according to empiricism. But here, according to Husserl, when we see something, an object, be it's a pen or a pencil or a computer or a tree, we don't see the image of that object. It's not the image of the tree, but the tree itself, the object itself is being given to us. And these experiences are not of images of things. See, here again empiricism is attacked.
What is the relation between image theory and representational semantics?
Okay, you mean the representational semantics of 20th century philosophy of language?
Yes.
Okay, see, in a sense, the representational semantics is based on image theory of perception, or rather which is a very central doctrine of empiricist epistemology. They are representationalists to the core. They believe that see, if you take Locke's very definition of knowledge as a perception of ideas, and ideas are created by qualities of objects, or rather qualities are defined as the power which objects have to create ideas in our mind. So representational semantics in a sense is based on this image theory, because here ideas are representatives. They are representatives of objects or the world which we experience. We don't experience the world as such. We experience only ideas. We perceive only ideas, or we perceive only impressions, and we don't get the object, but we get an image of the object. So representational semantics further developed in the 20th century also. It conceives that meaning is the representation, meaning consists in representation of the world. So language is considered as a representational medium. It represents the world, and in Wittgenstein's theory you could see that he talks about a kind of logical isomorphism between the three realms of language, thought and world, where the factual world, corresponding to the factual world, you have propositions, world of propositions in language and all that. So in a sense they all are based on the empiricist epistemology, which further can be understood by means of image theory of perception. We will make it clearer when we proceed further. It's an essential, see again the project here is, I am revisiting Husserl's project once again, it's to go beyond empiricism, because the perspectivism in empiricism is a little bit of problematic here. It's an essential feature of perception that it enables us to go beyond the image. So we have to really go beyond the image, which alone, according to the empiricist, it is an essential feature of perception that it enables us to go beyond the image. Beyond empiricism is in a sense going beyond the image theory, and according to the empiricist, image which alone present in consciousness and to relate to it as an image to a certain extra conscious object. So for them, for the empiricists, the images are so vital, without which you cannot explain the possibility of knowledge at all. And Husserl's attack is precisely on this concept of image theory. Again, beyond empiricism, relation to its transcendent object is part and parcel of the phenomenological essence of consciousness. This is what Husserl was trying to assert. The relation to its object. So there is an object. When you experience something, there is an object, and relation to this object, which is transcendent, is part and parcel of phenomenological essence of consciousness.
We experience the object, you told, no sir, but
Yeah.
is that object the image of the object or the object itself?
No, see, as far as empiricism is concerned, it's definitely, there is no concept of experiencing the object as such. You remember the Berkeleyan criticism of Lockean theory, Locke's concept of substance, and again Berkeleyan idealism, which denies the possibility of anything that is material. Okay, whatever exists to be is to be perceived, and perception by a mind. So everything in that way is mental, and once you conceive things in this manner, then the images play a vital role. But that's not the case with Husserl. Husserl asserts that it should not be the case. We should really go beyond these images and catch the objects directly. How do you do that? That is a Husserlian task, really. So relation to its transcendent object. So the object should be there, transcending the experience of the object, in a sense. Because when we experience it perspectively. But the object as such actually is transcendent. And image theory of perception is erroneous. This is what Husserl was trying to assert and show. The phenomenological experience and empiricist theory. Now Husserl is developing gradually what his theory of phenomenological experience, which is different from the experience, the theory of experience propagated by the classical empiricist philosophers. The perception of a coffee mug. Let us take, for example, the perception of a coffee mug. You experience or you perceive a coffee mug. Now, I perceive it from a perspective. Quite natural. I can see that the coffee mug is placed in front of me, and I perceive it from a perspective which is based again on how I sit, how I look at it, and all that. Now, but my perception of coffee mug is not the same as a perception of a coffee mug facade. So this is very important. The perception of the coffee mug, the actual coffee mug, actual quote unquote, which is there in the world, and the perception of the coffee mug facade. These two things, whether they are one and the same, this is a question. And according to the empiricist, they are one and the same, but Husserl tries to say that that's not the case, they are different. We will see how he is. The same pattern of colors is projected onto my retina in both the cases. When I see a coffee mug and also a coffee mug facade, the same colors, patterns of colors are projected to my retina, and whatever, once they hit the retina, the remaining is a biological activity. The sensors are sent to the brain and all that, and then I experience the object. But in both the cases, whether it is a facade or the actual mug, the patterns of colors and other things I get are one and the same. Then what makes the difference? Empiricism, the very same image is perceived. For empiricism, as far as perception of a coffee mug, actual coffee mug, and the perception of a coffee mug facade concerned, there is hardly any difference. The very same image is being perceived. But Husserl, when I perceive a coffee mug, I experience more than a mere facade, and I see a coffee mug presented from one perspective, no doubt. It is perspectival. I see it as transcending the perspective I have on it. Again, it's not just confined to the, or exhaust, my experience will not get exhausted with having a perspectival experience of the object in front of me, but I see it as transcending the perspective I have on it, because the object actually exists. The object actually exists independent of my perceiving it. See, it is just opposite to the Berkeleyan view, which says that to be is to be perceived. I see it as a full-fledged three-dimensional object. I see it a full-fledged three-dimensional object as an object that has various sides, not now visible to me, may not be visible to me. We are discussing two important concepts. Number one, the concept of perspectivism, where objects are given from a perspective, objects are experienced from a perspective. And number two, the possibility of transcending the perspective, which is also very important, because our knowledge should not be confined to one perspective alone. It should rather be about the full-fledged, three-dimensional full-fledged object which is there in the world. So that is what Husserl has said. When I see a tree, it's not just the tree image I see, but rather the tree as such, the entire tree. Here, if you see the last one, I see it as a full-fledged three-dimensional object, as an object that has various sides, and many of these sides may not be visible to me now, but it has got various other sides also. For me, as far as I am concerned, I see the object from a particular perspective. Now, empiricism, image projected by the actual coffee mug. Coming back to the coffee mug example, actual coffee mug and the coffee mug facade are exactly the same for the empiricists, because they basically conceive experience and knowledge with the mediation of images. And as far as images are concerned, whether the object is an actual coffee mug or a coffee mug facade, they are immaterial. Therefore, image theory fails to make this important distinction. Now, how does Husserl respond to this? This is something. We do not get raw, uninterrupted images in consciousness, but data that are already interpreted as images of some objects or others. It's not just, as Hume said, we are just getting impressions, that's all. We'll now see how Husserl reacts to this. Husserl says we do not get raw, uninterrupted images in consciousness, but data that are already interpreted as images of some objects or other. They are always images of some objects. When I see a tree image, it's against the Humean assumption that we get only mere impressions, nothing else. But that's not the case here. Here, when I get an impression or when I get an image, that is an image of something. So I always understand it as an image of something, which means that interpretation is built in the very process of understanding and knowledge acquisition itself. So this makes a very significant difference. Image versus adumbrations of objects. In perception, we are presented not with mere images of the visible side of an object, but with adumbrations of the object itself. This is what I have just mentioned. We know it's a kind of foretelling of the object. When you see the object from a particular perspective, we get the whole idea about the object. So rather, in other words, we can say that we perceive the object as such. Adumbrations of the object that is presented in perception is the visible side interpreted as a side of the transcendent object that goes beyond it. This is how objects transcend our perspective, while experience is necessarily perspectival. So the conflict between, on the one hand, you say that perception is perspectival, and on the other hand you say that the object of perception transcends, you are perceiving it. So how do you really build this bridge? How do you really resolve this conflict? Here is the answer. The adumbrations of the object that is presented in perception is a visible side interpreted as a side of the transcendent object that goes beyond it, beyond empiricism once again, by making experiences not only perspectival but also intentional. So here we come across a very crucial, or rather one of the central concepts with which the whole of phenomenological movement is concerned, the concept of intentionality, which we are going to deal in a major way in the subsequent couple of lectures, by making experiences not only perspectival but also intentional. Intentionality principle. So it's here intentionality principle in this context becomes relevant. Intending a full-fledged three-dimensional object. So Husserl talks about a full-fledged three-dimensional object, not just a facade, study of consciousness. So it's here in this context Husserl turns to the study of consciousness, how objects are given to the consciousness. a focus on consciousness, and here he analyzes or he tries to understand the nature of consciousness. What is meant by, what happens in consciousness when you are conscious about something, what is it exactly going on? The phenomena are given in consciousness. Now again, the phenomena with which phenomenology is concerned, phenomenology conceives the phenomena as a central topic or as a central objects of understanding and knowledge. These phenomena are given in consciousness. Since they are given in consciousness, consciousness is a major domain to be studied by phenomenologists, not just Husserl but by all the phenomenologists even after Husserl, like Merleau-Ponty and all that. Intentionality of consciousness. This is Franz Brentano, who is Husserl's teacher, and he was a psychology professor, also a philosopher, had major contributions in philosophy, and this is one single principle which had made him immortal in the world of philosophy, the concept of intentionality. I will read out: every mental phenomenon is characterized by the intentional inexistence of an object, the reference to a content, direction toward an object, or immanent objectivity. Every mental phenomenon contains something as an object within itself, although not everyone does so in the same way. So this is what struck Husserl later, the concept of intentionality. Husserl has perfected Brentano's concept by criticizing him. Intentionality of consciousness. Intentionality, in a sense we can say that it is directedness towards an object, is the defining feature of the mental phenomenon as opposed to the physical phenomenon. So here we could see that for Brentano, originally the concept of intentionality served a very important purpose. It is with the help of this concept he distinguished the psychical phenomenon from the physical phenomenon. The mental from the physical is being distinguished by the help of intentionality. Physical states are not intentional, but mental states are essentially intentional. Physical psychic divide. The reality has been divided into two domains, the physical and the psychic. Transcendent in immanence. So how objects become transcendent? By becoming immanent. So it is a very peculiar concept of immanentism Brentano is trying to propagate, and at the same time a notion of transcendence also is being envisaged. Background of Brentano's work: he was influenced by Aristotle and the medieval Aristotelians. So here we could see that he was influenced largely by Aristotle's philosophy, and was not happy with the way in which the Aristotelian view had been replaced by the subjectivist position of Descartes and Kant. Descartes is the one who made mind, the thinking substance, at the center of philosophization, because it is the thinking substance. See, if you examine the way in which he proves the existence of the three substances, the substance with a capital S, God, and the two relative substances, dependent substances, mind and body, we could see that he begins with mind. The existence of mind is so central and so vital, and existence of mind is so certain for him, and it is from this certainty, it is on this certainty that he builds his entire philosophy. And this emphasis on the subjective aspect, the subjectivity, the thinking mind, in a sense marginalized the importance of the object about which knowledge is possible, or about which we are concerned with when we talk about knowledge and experience. And Kant also, with his Copernican revolution, he placed the human mind at the center, and here we could see that the whole world is not, there is no concept of world as such, but always world as it is presented to us, or we get it. And Brentano is against this whole idea. He says that Kant, for example, mind as a central position as the agent for knowledge gathering activities, while Aristotle's objects remain independent and unaffected by consciousness even as consciousness interacts with them. So there is an object which is independently existing, of the mind which perceives it. The independent existence of the object is what is meant by transcendence. So, and Aristotle's view is being taken by Brentano in this context. Mind does not create and form the objects of this experience, and mind receives knowledge from objects in the world. So, with this we will conclude today's episode.
Sir, I would like to make a further clarification and explanation on the statement which you made, sir.
Okay, what is it?
Objects remain unaffected and are independent of consciousness even as consciousness interacts with them.
Okay. So, this is, I mentioned this when I discussed about Kant. Mind has a central position as the agent for knowledge gathering activities. While Aristotle, objects remain independent and unaffected by consciousness even as consciousness interacts with them. See, this is one principle which these thinkers, not only Brentano but even after Brentano, Husserl also was trying to assert, that the objects which we know, which we have knowledge about, they are independent of our consciousness. They have an independent existence of our consciousness. So, they remain independent and unaffected by consciousness. So, in that sense they transcend. So, they talk about transcendence in this term. Transcendentalism in phenomenology starts with this assumption that objects remain independent and unaffected by consciousness. But there is another dimension for transcendence, we will discuss it later. And even as consciousness interacts with them, because consciousness has to interact with them to have knowledge about it, and they appear in the consciousness, but at the same time they are independent and are not affected by consciousness. Consciousness cannot change it. Just because we have a particular way of understanding things does not change the world altogether. The world exists independent of us. So, the existence of an object independent of consciousness is envisaged, and it is this existence of an object or a world of objects that makes the intentionality principle more meaningful. Okay?
So, it is not paradoxical, sir?
No, it is not at all paradoxical. On the one hand, you have, they ensure that there is a world of objects, or the objects remain independent of our mind, and the mind can of course know it. So, there is no room for any paradox in this. Of course, there are some complex philosophical issues involved that we will address later. So, with this we will conclude today. Today we have seen basically the image theory of empiricism and the need for going beyond empiricism, because image theory of empiricism ultimately presupposes or asserts the perspectival nature and also talks about images, not about objects. But the phenomenological project is concerned about object, and how to really overcome this. It is here the intentionality principle became relevant. We have seen the intentionality principle briefly. We have seen some of the central principles of Brentano, and now how Brentano has really developed his concept of intentionality. It is influenced by Aristotle and also the medieval Aristotelians in developing his theory of intentionality. With this, the students can take the following questions. What is image theory? Number 1. Number 2, what is Husserl's major criticism against Husserl image theory? Number 3, what is perspectivism and why is it necessary that we should overcome perspectivism? With this we will conclude this episode. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.